Who pays when AI acts? Payments today and the future of agent-driven transactions. Last panel, you guys heard a little bit about as that movement of liquidity ends up on-chain, both on-chain rails and agentic rails. Now it's like, all right, now that it's on-chain, what happens next? Why don't we do just like one sentence intros? We don't do super long-winded intros, but we got plenty of people on the panel here. Ben, start with you. We'll move down the line.
Hey guys, I'm Benjamin Strisky. I am on the Strategic Projects and Investments team at the Starknet Foundation.
I'm Kendall, founder of Proximity, and we basically do stablecoins for near intents.
I'm Nigel on the go-to-market team at Bridge. We do stablecoin orchestration, issuance, and stablecoin linked card issuance.
I'm Rich from MoonPay. I'm VP for Payment Partnerships and Banking, so effectively look after everything which is on the fiat side of crypto. Yeah, I'm a bit more old-fashioned, traditional banking guy than the crypto guys.
I think for at least a little while longer, we're going to have a fiat system. Fortunately or unfortunately, hopefully we can move all that on-chain at some point, and then we'll rethink what the on-ramp situation looks like. But for now, we're still moving between fiat. We're moving between on-chain transactions. Richard, why don't we start with you? How does the movement of money between off-chain and on-chain rails, can agents basically abstract that away? Because it feels like if you're in one environment, if you're off-chain, you've kind of got your set of services. If you're on-chain, you got another set of services. You can kind of work pretty efficiently in these different environments. But if you have an agentic layer, does all of that get subsumed and you can translate a little bit more easily between off-chain and on-chain?
So I don't necessarily think so, no, because whether we like it or not, we are still very much reliant on the banking sector, right? And the problem with the banking sector is that it's built on humans, right? So humans are the ones that effectively authorize a transaction, are liable for a transaction, and so on. Yeah, with agents to work on the processing of transactions on behalf of, you've got to build like a delegation layer right in there. So you have to set limits and you have to set authorizations and so on. So I don't necessarily think that an agent will just take everything away because we don't necessarily want them to, right? You still want to have some sort of level of control in there, but it's like how you then instigate that control in the agent. So it could take away 80% of it, I'd say.
Got it. And so, guys, how are we thinking about, and Ben, maybe from the privacy perspective, the Starknet perspective, how are you thinking about stablecoins and agents, as they move on chain, and we'll kind of flow between our on-chain, off-chain partners here with Kendall and Nigel.
Yeah, so I think if we really want to see a lot of stablecoin activity and payments activity on-chain, it's going to have to be private. You look at traditional finance, almost everything is regulated and compliant, but if you pay someone through Wells Fargo, no one sees your payment history. When you're receiving your salary, no one sees your salary. And so, almost every public blockchain today is public, obviously. We haven't really seen payments take off in the way that I think a lot of people would have assumed 5 years ago that in 2026, people would be receiving their salaries on-chain, people would be paying other people on-chain, and it happens, but not to the extent that we thought it would. And I think privacy will have to be the biggest unlock for that.
Got it. And how do we fit agents into this as well? Like, as we bring tokenized assets on-chain, it feels like we've started with stable coins. We've now got treasuries. We're kind of moving down the risk curve. We're tokenizing all of these assets. When we end up with a place where we can effectively earn yield at, the drop of a hat, more stable coins are on-chain, both yield-bearing and non-yield-bearing. Where do you think agents, because it feels like we're actually building more and more products for agents. Where do you think agents are going to prioritize their cash? Maybe what are they holding when it comes to these payment currencies? If they're sending money between agents and agents, what do you think are the attributes that they're most looking for in stablecoins? Is it privacy or is it maybe something else?
I mean, access more than anything. And I think that's sort of the big problem. Like the infrastructure is starting to really get there, right? I mean, Link did a pretty cool launch last week that is the first practical way that I've seen to pay with agents for services you actually want. That being said, cards are not the best route for micropayments that probably are a useful way to pay for certain API calls. But then the problem we have right now is there's not, MPP is really cool, X402 are really cool. And there are some services that are starting to offer their APIs, but it's early, right? And so I think as we see basically just more adoption of those rails and more businesses that recognize that they'll actually have a lot of growth if they have a good product offered to agents, and the friction is very low, both like on-ramps, actually holding the balance in your wallet, and then having services that you actually want to consume as an agent or as a user using agents. Like that's, all those things kind of have to come together. And it's moving very fast, so I mean, probably we're talking months, but those pieces are still not really there today.
I would also add that I think the same way that AI has made producing reports more efficient, producing presentations more efficient, that these AI systems, when they're making payments, when they're using DeFi, when they're just operating on chain, they're going to want to do that in the most efficient way possible and really the most capital efficient way possible. So they're going to be designed to use the cheapest networks, to use the products with the lowest operating costs in order to make as much money as possible.
And I hate to use a swear word, right? But compliance, right, comes into it. You're talking about like agents on cards, right? That, and I agree, we're not anywhere near like how seamless and UX it needs to be, right? Because even if you, like we launched an agent card last week, right? But we still have to have that 3DS authentication layer built into it. So you can tell your agent to go and buy you something, right? And it can scour the market and it can find you the best possible price and so on. You still have to do a two-step authentication, right? When it finds it, because there's a card attached to the agent. So like, how do you get through that without every single financial institution blowing up overnight?
Nigel, I want to get you in here. I know your wheels are spinning.
Wheels are spinning. So I think a few things to your previous question, and I think one kind of interesting development in the market is there are more and more stable coins that are launching, and if I'm a user, there's probably three things that I care about. One, first and foremost, is this a safe asset? Is this actually worth $1? Two, what sort of upside do I have from holding this? Whether that's accessing yields through DeFi, or maybe you're using a bespoke stablecoin that some company has issued, and you're kind of in their ecosystem in that regard. And then three is, what can I actually buy with this? And that step of, hey, if I'm holding USDT on a certain chain, and this merchant or the agent that's receiving the payment wants to receive a different stable coin on a different chain, how does that conversion and interoperability happen? And ultimately, that needs to be abstracted away from the end user.
And at what cost, right, as well,
Exactly.
right? Because, I mean, when you're doing any type of transaction online, you have to be super visible when it comes to the cost, right? So the individual has to know how much is it costing me, right, to do that. So to your point about agent A talking to agent B, right? Agent A wants USDC, agent B wants PYUSD or something. Who is doing that conversion, right? How much is it costing? And that's where I think, again, horrible word, but compliance kicks in, right? Because you have to trace the transaction all the way back to the beginning, right? You have to be able to see who initiated that transaction. So agent to agent to agent to agent, if we get to that point, right, it masks like the transaction layer completely. And I think that's where like a lot of banks just get super scared, right? Because there is no accountability, right? Or, well, there is an accountability, but it's like really muddy, right, in terms of accountability.
So Richard said 2 swear words so far. So I want to challenge
never coming back.
actually, and hear everyone else's opinions on this. Maybe agents don't care about compliance. Maybe banks care a lot about compliance, but maybe agents are so innovative, they don't care about branding, they don't care about compliance. They care, is this thing secure? Code is law. Do I see any smart contract vulnerabilities? No. All right, I'm gonna these things are, they're great for
Start, and I'm gonna take out my suit here and agree with Richard that compliance definitely matters. And I think ultimately it doesn't really matter what the agent adoption cares. It's who controls the agent. And if we want mass agent adoption, it's who controls the agent. And if we want mass agent adoption, the reality is controls the agent. And if we want mass agent adoption, the reality is that in the United States. And if we want mass agent adoption, the reality is that in the United States. And if we want mass agent adoption, the reality is that in the United States there is regulation, as there should be. And if we want major payment systems to be interoperable with agents, so if we want JP Morgan, Chase to actually be willing to use these these systems, then they're going to have to just be compliant.
Yeah.
Crypto has a long history of unbanking people, and we don't want the same thing to happen to AI agent users, and so they're just going to have to be compliant with the law.
And just to add on to that, I think, hate to say it, but it's a relatively easy fix, right, as well, because agents are programmable, right? So you program the permissions into the agent, right? And the permissions you program into the agent is Korea safe to transact in, right? Because the agent is always going to go out and do what's right for you, right? Because that's ultimately what it's programmed to do. But you can program limits, like screenings, like you can program use this asset over that asset, like, and so on. You can program the agent. So as long as we get the programmability into the agent, right, then it shouldn't be a problem.
I'm also really interested to see how the relationship between kind of the KYC and the identity of the owner of the agent and the kind of risk and reputation and trust basis of that agent that's out, conducting commerce in the wild, how those two will be related over time. Because if you are going to have a human that's associated with an agent, then you can kind of get some of that reputation and compliance coverage that way. But you could also imagine a scenario where, someone buys a fraudster buys your KYC information off the dark web, KYCs, links that identity to an agent, and then, prompts that agent go out and, scam as many people as you can. So I think it's like a new kind of like vector of risk that we're all going to have to figure out how to navigate together.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess it's like you can already buy KYC on the dark web, but the things you can do are like maybe hard when you like have an agent that can go out and operate autonomously. Yeah, I think there's the compliance aspect, but I think businesses also do want to know, like not even purely for compliance reasons, they want to know who they're interacting with because that helps them make their product better and it helps them like retarget. And retargeting agents will be a thing, right? Like you'll have an agent use you and you'll be like, we want them to keep coming back and using us. And I don't know what that's going to look like. People are going to figure that out. So I think there's going to be at least some form of agent identity, like for compliance reasons, for financial transactions, but also just for business.
I'm curious, what has worked so well in terms of getting adoption? I'm curious user adoption and in terms of getting stable. The businesses and you guys have geared that towards. I'd imagine most of the businesses and you guys have geared that towards humans. The businesses and you guys have geared that towards humans so far. And do you think that so when you're looking at adoption, what has worked so far, and do you think that will carry over to agents? MoonPay's got quite a bit of users here. Maybe we'll just go down the line.
Yeah, I think, so what are we doing so far that works, right? I think trying to make things headless, right, I think would be massively beneficial to this space. I think honestly, we are literally tip of the iceberg, right, when it comes to agents. So I think we are figuring stuff out as we go.
When you say headless, you mean like maybe you can just describe that.
Just so MoonPay agnostic, right? So MoonPay doesn't appear in any environment, so completely headless for the individual. Okay. And it's something that we're doing across our business as a whole as well. So when you plug MoonPay in for other on-ramps, we're making it a headless experience as well, so it's unbranded.
They don't know that they're using MoonPay.
Correct, yeah. But I think also, like we touched upon before, which is just setting limits, right? Spending limits, asset limits, velocity limits, right, as well. So your agent can't just go off and just spend 1,000 things, right, in the space of 5 minutes, because it can do that, right? A human can't, right, physically do that, right? Agents can. So I think we're just figuring that out as we go, setting in these sort of parameters. And that's why I was saying agents being programmable helps. But yeah, we're just figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, I think specifically as it pertains to agentic stablecoin payments, probably the thing that's working the best so far is the narrative and the hype, like all things, and that's a cheeky answer, but thinking about the stablecoin payment use cases that now are becoming more and more ubiquitous, cross-border payments, dollar access, et cetera. A few years ago, they were powered by kind of narrative and hype as well. And ultimately what it comes down to is, especially for any business that's coming more from like a Web 2 direction, ultimately the product experiences that they unlock for customers and for their businesses need to have enough value that they can get over that hump of getting comfortable with some of the uncertainty and some of the risks of leaning into, a part of the industry where we're kind of building the plane while flying.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Yeah, I mean, I think like so it's kind of counter to the idea of agent authentication, although I think that'll start to get better. But like to your point, Richard, I think that the low friction experience is going to be like the products that see the most agent adoption. I mean, first and foremost, they're going to have to work. But second, it's going to be about low friction, right? Like a common thing if you're using agents today, whether it's coding or for anything, is you run into some blocker. And that blocker is usually some type of like you need to sign up for an account and there's not an agent-friendly way to do that. And I expect that, I mean, one of the nice things about on-chain is once you get over that hurdle of getting on-chain, which fortunately is getting much easier thanks to people like MoonPay and Bridge, then everything's actually extremely low friction. And so I think I'm very optimistic that the friction of getting on and off-chain will go as close to zero as possible. There'll always be some, but as close to zero as possible. And then agents will want to use those products because they'll be the lowest friction option in a lot of cases.
One interesting point you made there, just to add on to it, is like you mentioned that case where you're talking to a chat bot and then ultimately it needs to sign up for something and it can't, and that blocks you. The other piece of this is going to be the existing infrastructure and how businesses actually like cater to agents and design their sign up and onboarding flows to fit into some of those constraints that they have.
Yeah, so to finish this off, from our perspective, StarkNet's perspective, it's about creating the best system possible for the AI agents. And so there's a few different parameters there that matter. The first, obviously, is throughput. AI agents are going to need block space. On StarkNet, that's no longer really a blocker. We can support as much as we need to, given the current demand today. Right. The second, I think, is going to be network level configurations. And so everyone has probably seen the jokes about OpenClaw, spending my entire balance on some random nonsense, right? And so that actually can be a real issue. And if you give an AI agent a stablecoin balance, I would think it's actually not your money anymore. You have a very high probability of receiving it back, but it's actually secured by the code, obviously, of the agent. And so it's the code's money. And so, StarkNet supports native account abstraction, which enables you to set spending limits, other logic that, sends a little bit more of the control of your funds back to yourself. The third, from our perspective, is privacy, and I've touched on this a little bit already, but AI agents are going to replicate what works in traditional finance today for payments. And the reality is that payments need to be private, not public. And so with our privacy launch next month, you'll be able to have privacy for any asset, which means privacy transfers for stablecoins, which then means private payments for AI agents. And the last one, and I think this is a lot farther out, is decentralization. And while that might not matter too much today, later stage AI agents aren't going to necessarily want to operate on a network where someone can rug pull them. And so I think from our perspective, a path towards being a decentralized network makes us very attractive for AI agents.
Sticking with this notion of privacy, because I was kind of talking about this three-headed dragon on the last panel, and Zcash falls into that, and I think there are elements of Near's AI agent stack with OpenClaw, IronClaw that also takes into account this privacy. Hyperliquid not so much, but maybe we'll see down the road. You guys deal with a lot of businesses. I know StarkNet's perspective, privacy is important. Nigel, maybe from the Bridge perspective, and MoonPay and Proximity as well. From the B2B side, how much do businesses prioritize privacy when it comes to integrating stablecoin payments?
Yeah, I think it evolves kind of as they get deeper down the rabbit hole. First they'll look at stablecoins and see like what benefit can this integrate, integrating stablecoins, what benefits can it bring to my business? And then at a certain point when they're going through and, let's say you're setting up, a use case where an employee is getting their salary streamed to them. That's tied to, you know, a wallet that has a stablecoin linked card. They go and do all of their everyday spend. At a certain point, that company realizes, hopefully before the end user, like, okay, you can see how much money this person is making and everything that they're spending it on. And that's obviously a big problem. So I agree, like privacy is over time going to become table stakes. And it's also important as we're thinking about like different privacy protocols, how does that fit in and become, you know, not mutually exclusive with compliance. So it's a matter of making sure like the entities that need that information for regulatory purposes can get it. But it's kind of on a need-to-know basis where not everything is just out on chain.
But that's where like tokenization comes into play, right? Because you can share data, right? KYC tokenization, privacy tokenization. Yeah, and I think,
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. Like that, it very much step one is like that they get some other benefit. I think that's exactly right. Like that, it very much step one is like that addition from using stable coins. And then they realize, I mean, so I think an interesting, that's where the demand is right now. When and they realize like, oh, this is super primary, so like everyone could see all these, you know, cross-border payments right now. And they realize like, oh, this is super public, so like everyone could see all these, you know, cross-border payments now. And they realize like, oh, this is super public, so like everyone could see all these, you know, cross-border payments that I'm putting out there. That's not how they want to operate their business, right? So like, yeah, very much like it's a second order demand, but now that a lot of businesses have gotten over that first hurdle demand, it has become extremely important. And so we have seen a lot more and more demand.
And does that happen at the chain level, or, you know, I kind of mentioned this on the previous panel as well, this asset-centric view of the world. Can you integrate that directly into the stablecoins themselves? You know, I'm seeing more of that with like RWAs. You have KYC baked in a little bit, compliance being the key word there. But yeah, when it comes to, you know, some of these privacy elements, do you see that integrating at the asset level, the stablecoin level, or more so the chain level?
I mean, I'm extremely biased here, but I'll plug Near just here I mean, I think the challenge is that currently there's actually assets across many different chains that are doing very well, which is a great state of the world depending on your view. The challenge then is like, it's actually kind of difficult. If a business has to operate across multiple chains, then if you have single chain privacy, that starts to become really difficult. So the way we've done it, because our whole view of the world is like, we just care that you're using near intents, which actually connects a bunch of chains together. We're able to implement privacy at the near intents level, so you can move between these assets on different chains while staying within the private environment and keep that whole interaction private.
So everything on near intents is private.
Everything on near intents is private. You have to right now. You have to opt into it, but eventually that'll be default. You can opt out, of course. There are some, actually, for regulatory reasons, there are some institutions in particular that don't want privacy, but the average business seems to want it. Yeah.
Got it. Few minutes left here. Maybe just zooming out a little bit. I'm curious to get your long view here on everyone's long view here. There's been a few smart people that have said AI is the saving grace of crypto. Bless you. I'm just curious if you guys see this world too. Like we obviously had. We've had a lot of problems here with crypto. It feels like now we have AI agents. Are they going to become the primary users of these tokens? I see Nigel's wheels spinning. I can tell you've got something cooking.
I think it's a more like logical form factor for machines to use stable coins. And I guess to Ben's point earlier, where like a lot of the activity and kind of the rules of the road are dictated in code, it just seems to make a lot more sense. The reason why I'm like hesitant a little bit is I also don't think we should be viewing as an industry AI as it's gonna like swoop in and only the machines are gonna use crypto. Like this should not be mutually exclusive from us onboarding the next billion people on chain as well. So my answer would be both.
I completely agree with that. And so I don't think AI is going to be crypto's saving grace. I think that a lot of smart people in crypto have been preaching for a long time that crypto is a more capital efficient system. And if you're a rational actor, you should be using it over the traditional financial rails. And AI, by all means, should be rational. And so if AI agents are choosing to use crypto because it is a better system, then that's validating what people have said previously, and then it should usher in the next wave of true adoption.
I mean, just to build on that, I think it marries together really well, right? So digital assets, AI, agentic, like it's all programmable. You can put limitations in, right? You make the payment, you are liable. As again, going back to the outside of paying, right? You make the payment, you are liable. If an agent steps outside of its, right? You make the payment, you are liable. If an agent steps outside of its parameters, market that it can't operate in, which you necessarily haven't agreed with, or is in a market that it can't operate and so on, who's liable, right? And I see that there's going to be a whole other world of, and somebody will be like, well, you're the human behind your agent, you told it what to do, and I think that's going to be a bit of a headache in the future. All right, pretty quickly, I think, but I think that's going to be a bit of a headache in the future.
And then it's a question of if it's...
Then you're in court, and it's like, what the hell? Like, yeah. Then you're paying an agent to represent you in court, and it's like, what the hell? Like, yeah. Then you're paying an agent to represent you in court, and it's like, what the hell? Like,
Well said. These are
agent to represent you in court, and it's like, what the hell? Like,
well said. These are oh yeah.
represent you in court, and it's like, what the hell? Like,
Well said. These are oh yeah. Kendall.
I mean, not much to add other than like agents are definitely eating everything. They'll eat crypto too. Crypto would have been fine without agents. I don't think it's a saving grace. It would have been fine, but agents are eating everything. Thus, like, eventually the average user of crypto will for sure be an agent, and maybe pretty quickly.
We got a minute left. Any questions from the audience? You guys curious about anything that we haven't covered so far? All right. If not, I've got a question for you guys. Who is currently getting paid in stablecoins? Like from their business, not receiving fiat, but you're receiving stablecoins. I see one hand. Guys, that's an issue, isn't it?
What are
like,
more
doing?
Yeah.
from like, yeah, I mean, we're at a crypto event. Like, there's tons of stable coins. What it feels, and I think almost everyone on the panel mentioned, payroll as like the catalyst for stablecoin payments. We've obviously got a lot of work to do. It feels very early. I mean, who's doing this? It feels very important. How do we get this off of one, right? We're not at zero. We got one. The guy in the orange shirt. Shout out to that guy.
we so we work with Deal, right? So we powered Deal, right? So the employment record business, and they are paying their contractors in stablecoin. Like the problem is, and I said this on a panel earlier, right? We are not there with the infrastructure yet. So you can get paid in stablecoin, but like, can you pay your rent in stablecoin? Can you pay your mortgage in stablecoin? Like, unless you have a stablecoin backed card, which you can then like work, and it can be a little bit expensive. Like the infrastructure is just not there to off-ramp that stablecoin one-to-one. You can get paid in it, but then what do you do with it, right? So I think once we build that infrastructure, it'll be easier, and everybody will get paid in stablecoin.
Yeah, I mean, we built out all these on-chain tools, and it feels like we've actually built maybe like too far ahead, right? But we haven't thought like, we've got to get these stablecoins into the people's hands, from the onset.
I think there are a lot of people, like we pay contractors in stablecoins, and there are.
So you didn't raise your hand, Kendall.
Well, I don't get paid in stablecoins because they're non-U.S., right? And like that's the reason, right? It's like, and I mean, we're not a U.S. company, but it's like it's easy for international payments, right? So yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people in crypto, particularly if a company is operating like they have contractors all over the globe, which is very common. Then there are a lot of crypto companies paying people in stablecoins. But I think the point is like crypto people are willing to get paid in stablecoins because they know how to off ramp. Like they have exchange accounts. Like for them, they're fine with the friction. Whereas like the average person who's working in a normal company that doesn't have anything to do with crypto, for them the friction that is a problem. Like if a company says, "Hey, we're going to pay you in stablecoins," they're like, "What? That's horrible. Like why are you going to do that to me?" And that's the missing piece. Like,
Yeah. And then there's this whole rabbit hole of tokenized deposits, which maybe could help on that front, but we won't get into that today. Guys, give it up for our panelists. Thank you so much.